Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this week we are going to be talking about books with women from history. March is Women's History Month, so we wanted to share books that celebrated that. As we're sharing our titles, if there are any that you would like to get your hands on, there are several ways to do that. The first and probably the quickest is to call your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and speak to one of the staff there. Let them know the titles that you're interested in. If you prefer to do it on your own, our online catalog web address is on your screen now, and that will allow you to request any physical versions of the titles we share, hardcover, paperback, audiobooks on CD. Or if you're interested in a title that's available in one of our digital formats, we provide two different platforms to do that. The first is Overdrive, and the app for Overdrive is Libby. And Overdrive provides downloadable ebooks and audiobooks, and also now offers downloadable magazines as well. The other platform is Hoopla, and Hoopla provides downloadable ebooks and audiobooks, as well as movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla is if you see a title available on the platform, there's no wait for it. And with us this week is myself. I'm Jennifer Granuski. I am the community librarian at the Dundee branch. And our introductory question for this week is to share a woman who has had an important impact in your life. And for me, and I think for so many people, that is my mom. My mom is Jerry Clark. And just there's something about her. There's two things in particular. First of all, my mom has always accepted me no matter what. I know when I go home, like there's almost an immediate relief and comfort just being there, because I know no matter how I'm feeling or what I want to talk about or what I want to do, whether it's chat or just take a nap, my mom is there for it and fully supportive. And the other thing to share about my mom is that my mom is blind. She has a progressive disease called retinitis pigmentosa. And so during my life, I have seen her cope and thrive with that. My mom is still able to crochet and knit, even though she can't see. She listens to the patterns. And then I don't know how it works because I have not learned to be crafty, but she has little markers that she uses on her needles to like know where she's at and what she's supposed to be doing. And she has made amazing things. The hats that she makes every year for all of her grandkids and for my son are amazing. He's got a handmade Pikachu hat. He's got one from We Bare Bears. He's got a Mickey Mouse one. Like, they're amazing. This isn't just simple stuff. It's complicated and adorable. And I love my mom's attitude for something that is so challenging. She just keeps moving forward. She reads Braille, you know, it's incredible. My mom's the best. So sorry about all the other mothers out there. Mine's the best. Just saying that now. So that's my woman who has had an important impact on my life. Also with us this week is Ashley Lyford, the community librarian at the Summerfield Petersburg branch, and who is a woman who has had an impact on your life, Ashley?
Well, I'm going to say my mom too, obviously. She has just always pushed me to be the best person that I can be. And my parents divorced when I was young, and she was a stay-at-home mom. And so I watched her have to struggle and, you know, figure that out. And we moved around a little bit while she got under her feet and everything. But she like worked hard and she still showed up to things, you know, like she was constantly working, but anytime I had anything, she was there. Like she made it work. She provided for us. She held both parent roles. Like, I don't know. She just did everything she could. And she, you know, pounded it into my brain to become a strong, independent woman so that I would never be dependent on a man and then, you know, not be anymore, like struggle with that. Every challenge she's faced, like she just rises up to it. She's just a strong woman, and I'm very grateful to have her.
Thank you, Ashley. Also with us this week is Kristen Brown, a reference librarian at the Bedford Library. And who is a woman who has impacted your life, Kristen?
So this was really tricky because I feel like I kind of just taken all of these women energies. I'm sure we all had a hard time with this, but I actually chose two, kind of one that helped me more with like not really my professional career, but just my interests, and then also the women that like really made a difference. So just the various women in my life, my mother, my aunts, my sister is a big one, and all of my grandmothers, and not to mention all of my female ancestors that I've had the privilege of getting to know through genealogy, and they all have this thread that they're all just very resilient and independent and forward thinking, and I just admire all of them so much. So I'm constantly taking little tidbits from all of them. And then there's one woman that it's like a weird connection. She always comes up anytime I talk about women that I really admire, but her name is Artemisia Gentileschi, and she is a 17th century painter, and she was kind of like the first awesome feminist painter of the time. So obviously during that time period there weren't a lot of female painters, and she was very young, and finally she's getting her due credit, but I didn't learn about her in school. I found her on my own, and I think just seeking her out and her spirit, and there was a lot of stuff that happened to her that she could have just fallen beneath and would have never continued painting, and she didn't do it. And so I just kind of like thrived off of her feminist vibes when I was young and getting into painting and being an artist. And so I've carried that with me. So
nice. Thank you, Kristen. And finally this week we have Jody Rest with us, and Jody is the community librarian at the Bedford branch. And who is a woman that has impacted your life, Jody?
I almost forgot to unmute myself. I just panicked at the last second. Of course, I'm going to say my mom. We all have to say our moms, right? My mom, I'm going to say both my mom and my grandma. So my mom and my grandma both worked for the library system. So that's part of how they inspired me, because obviously that's part of why I chose the job I did, although I came to this late in life, but it worked out really well. But my mom is one of those, she has a very calm demeanor, and so I'm much more like my dad than my mom, but I try to channel my inner mom when I know I need to step back from something. But she's one of those people that's always, when you were talking, Jennifer, unconditional love was the thing that came to my mind, because that's both my mom and dad always provided that. And so it didn't matter what choices I was making or what, I could be in trouble over a choice, but not in their love for me. So I was always very aware of that. But just her ability to roll with the punches, I guess, and not judge people harshly. She's always very kind. So that's a wonderful thing. Now, my grandmother, who is my dad's mom, it was my dad's mom that was the librarian. I give her a lot of credit for who I am today, because we always said she was like a wordsmith. She was always, what did we call her? Our grammarian. She was our grammarian. Because she was, both my brother and I, enunciate your words and use the correct ones. So we keep that very much in our mind and have taught that to our kids in ways that we didn't realize we probably were, because of my grandma. And I was just speaking about her to my daughter the other day. She was born in 1912. Her parents died during the Spanish flu epidemic, and she was raised by her grandparents. She went to college, like for somebody who, she had a college degree and became a librarian and worked when Mary Kay Domi was the director here. And so just to know those things, like that's pretty incredible for a woman in those times. Raised two kids of her own and was active with her 6 grandchildren. And, it was just really, they used to have an orchard at their house. They lived right on the Raisin River and had an orchard at their house. And I don't know, just lots of neat and interesting things. She was not a warm, fuzzy grandma. My mom's mom was a warm, fuzzy, or more of a warm, fuzzy grandma. But yeah, anyway, she was an interesting person.
Thank you, Jody.
Sorry.
No, that's excellent. I was just sitting here thinking, I was like, okay, we can just stop now. I know we're supposed to talk about books, but I'm feeling good at this moment. And I feel like everybody could just be like, I got my good moment for the day. Let me think about the women who have changed my life. So thank you to all of you. We are going to continue on, though, since that's what we're supposed to do. So we're going to talk about the books that talk about women from history. And I'm going to ask Ashley to kick us off.
Sure. So I have two books that are actually kind of similar. The main reason I really love them is because I read them with my niece. So she's younger. Well, we read them when she was probably like 7 or 8. And I'll start with this one. Yep, Bad Girls Throughout History. This is written by Anne Shen, and it's just got short, you can see here, just like 1-page short summaries of these women throughout history. It's pretty broad. The topics are pretty broad. There were some women in here that I had never heard of, which is fun to like discover new people while I'm reading and discovering with Cece. So that was fun. It talks about all types, pirates, which, you know, is fun and kind of like a, I don't know, you never really think of pirates in real life, but so like pirates, artists, activists, warriors, scientists, spies, there's all sorts of things in there. So like Cece didn't necessarily want to read like page by page by page, but there is something in there for every single person. And the goal of this book is to give you just a little bit of information so that then if you find someone who you think is interesting, you'll go and learn, try and research, read more about them. All the illustrations in this book are watercolors, so that's fun. I really love watercolor apparently. And so, you know, we just kind of flipped through, looked at the pictures, chose a story. It was a good time. The other book I'm going to talk about is Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. This is the same kind of idea. They're all short stories about women. They're filled with stories about women who have overcome adversity or have gone against the norm and like helped pave the way for us today. Each story has a quote, and so this one has more information, which I liked. Each story has like the their lifetime period, where they were from, and then a quote from them. Another thing that I really loved about this one is all the illustrations in it are done by different female artists. So they're all different, but they're all beautiful, and it's just another way to represent, you know, women. So this one also I feel like was much more, it had stories of women worldwide. I thought the other one was kind of more Western women, but this one is across the world. So that was interesting. There was some overlap between the two, but not surprisingly, not as much as you would think. And this one had a lot of women in it that I hadn't heard of, which to make it this late in life and not hear of some of these women makes me a little sad, but they're listed in here, and so that was a good read. Another cool thing about this book is it's written in fairy tale format. So like some of the stories start once upon a time, which is, you know, fun and like a way to incorporate that. This book was the first book to solely be put together through crowdfunding, which I thought was cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought that was pretty cool. Lastly, the other thing that I really loved about this book is at the end, there is a spot for your child, not in a library book, obviously, but if you have this book your own, to write their story and draw their own illustration, which I thought was so fun and just a great activity for us to do, not at bedtime, which is when we always read this, but you know, bedtime was a chance for us to talk about it, and once we got to that part, try and help her figure that out and listen to who she thinks she is and what she's experienced. So that was fun and just a really great bonding experience, kind of, but you know, we both got to learn, which I loved.
Hey, thank you, Ashley. That's fascinating. I'm sure if I looked at those, there would be lots of those women that I would not know. I always
much.
feel anytime I pick up history, there's so much that I don't know, particularly, like you said, non-Western civilization history.
Right, right. Yeah, so many that I didn't know.
So thank you, Ashley.
Yep.
And let's have Kristen share her women in history titles next.
Okay, so my first title is called The Girl Who Thought in Pictures, the story of Dr. Temple Grandin by Julia Finley. I think it's Masca. I'm having a hard time pronouncing things today. But much like what Ashley talked about with her niece, both of the books that I chose were books that I had come across and thought it would be really fun to read with my daughter. She just turned 5. And so any books that I can find on women and women doing awesome things, I like to pick them up. And also anything that's illustrated, I'm all about. So for the book about Dr. Grandin, which is another misfortune because I had never heard of her before or any of her accomplishments, but they just made I believe it was a Netflix movie on her, but she is known now for being an autism advocate and for being an animal behavior scientist. So when she was really young, she was autistic, but at a time when that wasn't what they had diagnosed it as, or they haven't really discovered what all, the autistic spectrum was. And so she had all these behaviors, and basically everyone just told her she's never going to talk, she's never going to amount to anything. And her mother knew that there was something special about her and that she needed to get a little bit of an extra outlet or something that could help her. And so she went to school and she still wasn't speaking, and she was having a hard time with her educators and her peers. And so her mother sent her out west to go to her aunt's house, and it was there that she discovered her connection with animals. And it was also there that through this connection with animals, she was able to kind of cope with those feelings and those actions and those sensory things that were really an impact on her. And so she ended up getting 3 degrees, and she really kind of changed the way that farmers handle their livestock. So she's a big advocate for humane livestock treatment, especially aimed at like slaughterhouses, which is kind of a weird thing to think about. But with the industry, she really understood that these animals were really fearful and they weren't being treated in the way that they could be treated considering the situation. And so she actually invented a certain type of corral and a certain way that they could have the steer go through the process so that they could, do the things that they need to do. And so she is widely known now for this. And I just think it's amazing because at the end of this book, so the illustrations are really great. The book is in verse, so there's rhyming words in it, and it talks about her story, but it relates to the reader. And so it begins with like, if you've ever felt down or if you've ever felt like you don't belong, you need to know about Temple Grandin because this is what happened to her. And my favorite quote in this book is different, not less. And I feel like that perfectly describes, anybody that is in this, who finds themselves in, I was going to say a situation, but that's not really a situation, but anybody who is seen as not the norm, right? Like you're just different. You're not less of a person. And I really appreciated that. And it really opened the conversation with my daughter and I about how people are different and it doesn't make them any less than you. And it's okay to try to understand. You don't have to not talk about it, or you don't have to not talk to them about it. And then there's like a little letter in the back from Temple Grandin, and it's like she's writing the letter to the reader, and it says, like, if you're interested in these things, make sure you try to do whatever you can and don't give up, and things like that. So I really liked that. It was a really, really good book, and that's one that we've actually checked out a couple of times and we've revisited. So that was a really good choice. And then the next one, there's actually a couple a couple of these. So this one is Little Dreamers. There's also a Little Leaders, and this is kind of like a book series that Vashti Harrison has done. And if you're not familiar with Vashti Harrison, she is an amazing illustrator. She did the illustrations for a book called Hair Love, which I absolutely adore. That's one that we read in my house a lot too. But this one's Little Dreamers, Visionary Women Around the World, and it's set up a lot like the books that Ashley had referenced. So it talks about all these amazing women from all over the world, and hopefully my filter doesn't block this out. But it does have the illustrations by Vashti Harrison, and then just like a page of what that woman would have gone through, or how she accomplished the things that she had accomplished. And so again, this was just a really great way to go through and just find out about new women. We would pick 1 or 2 stories a night. We would always do this at bedtime, and we would read about that woman, and then we would just kind of talk about like, hey, that would be really cool to have that job, or how do you think that made her feel when those things happened to her? And I would say about 90% of the women in this book, I had no idea who they were, which, like Ashley said, is very sad, but it also makes me a little angry that I don't know who these women are. Like, we should know who these women are. So there were a couple of them that were our favorites. My personal favorite was Sister Coretta Kent, who was a pop art nun. Like, come on, how do we not know about her? Like, Andy Warhol was her biggest influence, and so she used like her messages to put in a form of pop art. That's so cool. There's also a whole bunch of like Catherine Dunham, who was a choreographer and an anthropologist, and she would use the cultural dances of Africa, and then she would bring them into choreography and research where those dances came from and how they were tied to the tradition. It was just really cool. So I highly recommend, if you have little ones and you're trying to get them introduced to just women. So in general, they also have men's, and they also have ones that are just primarily African American women leaders. So that book series is really great.
Thank you, Kristen. And let's have Jody share her books about women in history.
I have several to talk about. That just reminded me what Kristen was talking about, though, was She Persisted by Chelsea Clinton. I saw Chelsea speak at a conference that I went to, and she's got several books that she's done about female people that you might not know much about. But anyway, that's a different topic that we can talk about another time, maybe. The first book that I chose was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This book was kind of a big deal several years ago. It was written in 2010. Because it became an HBO movie that.
Oh, I think we lost Jody. Can the other 2 of you hear her? I might have lost Kristen as well.
I can't hear Jody or see either one.
Okay, well, in the meantime, I'm going to take a moment and hopefully they will rejoin us. I'm going to go ahead and talk about my books, and hopefully I'm guessing that they both happen to be in separate rooms at the Bedford branch. So I'm guessing something happened to their internet. So we're going to hope that they realize that and they rejoin us. And in the meantime, I will talk about mine. So give me just a moment and I'm going to share my screen with my titles. Oops. Just a moment. Technical difficulties. All right, so my first title is nonfiction, and it is Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy by Karen Abbott. And I read this one because we did it for book club, and it's been one of my favorite nonfiction titles that we've done. I think the title's pretty self-explanatory. It covers 4 women who were undercover during the Civil War. 2 of the women were on the wrong side of history. They did spy for the Confederacy, and they either knew or supported those who owned enslaved peoples during the time. So that is difficult to read about as you look at these women and see their amazing gifts and how they used them to hurt others. So it is a very complicated book. These women are like all women and have shades of gray. But I appreciated that Karen Abbott tried to give a full look at some of these women from the Civil War that until I read this, I didn't know anything about. So Liar, Tempter, Soldier, Spy. So the 4 women, the first is Rose Greenhow, who was a Southern spy, ringleader, and an ambassador. And in particular, there's a portion of the book that's actually taken from transcripts of a trial that Rose went through, trying her to see if she was a traitor. And these transcripts kind of blew my mind because they demonstrated that the ability to talk out of both sides of your mouth is not something that is new to modern politics. It was kind of mind-blowing listening to the transcripts. They would ask her a question, the lawyer would, and she would manage to deflect it or change the topic or throw it back at the lawyer like it's your fault that you would even ask such a question of me, a genteel Southern woman. So that was fascinating, just to listen to that and feel like, wow, this could be happening now. So she was interesting. And then there was Belle Boyd. And the only way I could describe Belle Boyd is like she was a celebutante at a time that there weren't celebutantes. Again, she worked for the South, but she was such a manipulator. She used everything that she had to get information to give to the Southern Army. And one, the fact that any of the men in the Southern Army would listen to her was kind of surprising that she was able to get their trust. And then 2, that she got as much information as she did and passed things along in the way that she did. The other 2 women, Elizabeth Van Lew, who actually lived in Richmond. So she was living in the southern half of the country, but she was an abolitionist. And so she ended up playing both sides in order to help the North and to get them information out of Richmond about what was happening, what she knew about the plans. She put her life in danger several times in order to transfer information, because transferring information wasn't like it is now where you just kind of do it on a phone or do it electronically. Like you had to do it physically in some way. And then the final one, who has gotten a little bit more information about her out there than the other ones that I knew of, Emma Edmonds goes to war as a Union soldier and renames herself Frank Thompson. And so she actually fights in the Civil War as a man. And there's several books about her out there. So all 4 of these women, 1, went into the book, didn't know anything about them. 2, was kind of blown away by what they did and how they did it, for better or for worse. And if somebody had given this to me as a fiction novel, I would have felt like, well, none of that actually happened. You know, it was just unbelievable what they did. So if you're looking for a really fascinating look at the Civil War through the perspective of women and what they did, this is a really excellent book to pick up. Karen Abbott does a lot of nonfiction focused on women. So if you just are interested in nonfiction about women, check her out. She's got a lot of good stuff out there. My other title, and I'm curious as to whether this woman was included in any of those compilations that the others of you have read, because I picked this one up because I enjoyed Michelle Moran's book about Madame Tussaud. And Michelle Moran writes historical fiction, often focused on women in history. And I picked this one up because I had read her other one and really enjoyed it, didn't really know what was going to be happening in it, and once again was blown away by history that I had completely missed. So this is set in mostly in the 1850s in India. And I did know that, you know, Britain had come over, had colonized, overthrown a lot of the Indian territories. And I knew that, but that was kind of all I knew. This book focuses on Lakshmi Bai, who was the Rani of, I want to make sure to get her territory correct, Jhansi. So basically that means she's the queen of this territory. And as she was being raised, she was raised in a very unusual manner. She was raised with the boys that were probably likely to be chosen as the princes of this territory, and she was trained to fight, hand to hand, trained with a sword. She was taught to read and write, which was very unusual for women in that time period, particularly in India. And then when she was married to the king of Jhansi, and he passed away fairly quickly after their marriage, and they had not had any children. Well, leave it to the colonizers to come up with a way to say that there must be a way to annex these territories that we don't already have complete control over. And so Britain came up with the doctrine of lapse, which was if you were in an Indian territory that did not have a born heir already in place, that they could just come in and annex your territory and it was theirs. So Lakshmi Bai had sent a letter, tried to negotiate and said, we're going to adopt an heir. There's somebody that we've had, you know, in our family for some time, and she was rejected. And this leads her into turning into a warrior queen. And you hear that and you kind of think, like, no, that couldn't have happened. It did. She put together her own army. Her army had both men and women that were trained to fight, which I thought was fascinating. She trained some of them herself, and she goes to battle. And if you know the history of India, you probably have a good idea how this ends. But it was so fascinating because I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know anything about these battles that took place, the women soldiers. And when I looked back at this book, because it's probably been 7 or 8 years since I've read it, so I looked her up again, just reading her Encyclopedia Britannica entry, which is literally like 4 paragraphs long, it's like explosive. You're like, what? She did this, and then she did this, and then she did this. It's mind-blowing. And so this is historical fiction, so there are clearly going to be dialogue and conversations that nobody would know what took place in them. And Moran has taken some leeway there, but she always puts a lovely historical note in to let you know, hey, here's the stuff that definitively happened. So it was just fascinating to me. It's an excellent book because the plot moves right along, and it's excellent because it gives me a perspective about a piece of history about which I had a very vague understanding. So now I'm curious, was Lakshmi Bai the Rani of I'm going to say it wrong again. I always have to look at how it's spelled. The Rani of Jhansi. Was she in any of your books? I'm just curious because I feel like if you had read that entry, like it would stand out, like Warrior Queen, India, 1850s. See, like there's so many. Oh, Ashley's nodding her head. She's in there.
She's in this one.
Yay. That makes me happy. So if you're curious about her, that's an excellent book. There's also apparently, again, because I was looking it up to prepare for this, there's also apparently a movie about her that came out recently. It's on one of our digital platforms. I didn't put it on the slide, but I'm curious to see what that's about as well. So there you go. New person in history.
I was thinking the one that you were talking about with the Civil War, the women in the Civil War, I think it was the Historical Museum that just had a speaker talk about that. And I think the book that they were talking about it was about the same thing. It was based on 3 women who, or like a couple of women who went through the Civil War, but they were dressed as men. Like they put on facade that they were men, but I could have swore it was the same author. I don't know for sure if it is or not, but
it may have been, because there's a lot about it's Emma Edmonds, and then she renamed herself Frank Thompson. There is quite a bit about her. I don't know if I can't remember, again, it's been a while since I've read it, if she had a diary or something that they were able to look at so that they were able to get the information about her.
I think the book that I'm thinking of with the museum was They Fought Like Demons.
Okay.
Just if anybody's interested.
So there's more out there. So much fascinating history out there.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah. So those are my 2 books. And since we lost Jody and Kristen in there, I'm going to go back to Jody. And she's going to continue on with her books about amazing women in history.
Awesome.
I was wondering if you lost both of us because I obviously was not there, so I couldn't see that. It's a Bedford thing, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so I had started speaking about The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Henrietta Lacks was an African-American 31-year-old mother of 5 who lived in Baltimore when she died of cervical cancer in 1951. She had been going to Johns Hopkins Hospital for her cancer, and they actually harvested cells from Henrietta, which are now known as HeLa cells, unbeknownst to her and her family, and without their permission. And these cells have not only lived on since then, but have been replicated countless times and have been used in medical research for monumental cures and treatments, from the polio vaccine to HIV. So this book tells the story of Henrietta and her family, and how the medical industry, in the name of science, can easily exploit society's most vulnerable people. It's really an interesting story. It was a hard to write story. Rebecca had a hard time earning the trust of the family, as you can probably imagine, because, you know, here these cells had been taken. One of the doctors that was treating her had noticed. There's a very interesting, I'll just say, I was looking some of this stuff up. This is probably why I was so distracted earlier, but YouTube, if you look on YouTube for Immortal Cells of Henrietta Lacks, there's a really interesting 4.5-minute video that explains the importance of these cells. Most human cells die after a certain period of time and will only replicate a certain number of times, but the HeLa cells have never died. This woman died in 1951, and the HeLa cells continue to grow and replicate themselves, and that's why they've been so helpful to science. So it's a really, really interesting story, very well written, and again was turned into an HBO movie starring Oprah Winfrey. So Oprah plays Henrietta's daughter, who is the person that the author works with to learn this story and tell this story. So then I have 2 historical fiction books. One of them's The Aviator's Wife, which is an account of the life of Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Anne was a free spirit herself, and maybe Charles recognized that in her from the start. This fictional accounting follows the real events of their lives, including their famous flights with Anne as the flight crew and the kidnapping of their child. Anne authored several books of her own and was the first woman to be licensed as a glider pilot in the world. And then there was a interesting, as Jennifer pointed out, a lot of times in historical fiction books, the author will give you some notes at the end to tell you about what part of this is true and what part of this is fiction. And so she does a really nice, Melanie Benjamin is who wrote this particular one, but she does a really nice explanation of that. But the one thing that she says here that I thought was really interesting was, as a historical novelist, the most gratifying thing I hear is that the reader was inspired after reading my work of fiction to research these remarkable people's lives further. That is what historical fiction does best, I think. It leaves the reader with a desire to know more, and I hope my novel accomplishes this. And then she gives a list of the books that she used to help her write the novel. So, and that's exactly what I love about historical fiction. I do read a lot of nonfiction, and I feel that we've really come a long way with that. An awful lot of biographies, for instance, just in the last 10 years or so, are written much more to read much more like fiction than nonfiction, and so that makes it easier for people to learn about people, you know, or things or events or whatever. So that's really a great thing. The third book that I had to talk about is called Loving Eleanor by Susan Wittig Elbert. I think my mom actually recommended this to me. So this is the story of the intimate friendship of Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok. Lorena Hickok was an AP political journalist who was assigned to follow Eleanor during the 1932 presidential campaign of her husband FDR. And then the 2 women became deeply involved in each other's lives during the Great Depression, the New Deal, and through World War II. Their friendship was well documented in 3,300 letters to each other. So that's an awful lot of what this author used to write this story. And of course, again, it is historical fiction, but when you have that much material to use, I found it really, really interesting. Eleanor Roosevelt is somebody who has always interested me. We have some great books about her, including one by Russell Friedman, which I really love, which is a juvenile one, and one that documents her nationally syndicated newspaper article called My Day, which she wrote 6 days a week from 1935 until 1961. That's a long time. But the autobiography of Eleanor Roosevelt, which has been re-released in print, we have it available in some downloadable formats and in print formats. It gives a full, rich accounting of her long life of service, including her involvement in FDR's personal and political life, the women's organizations and youth movements that she worked for, the demands that she made for consumer welfare, civil rights, and improved housing. And then after her husband's death, she worked as a UN delegate, an activist, and a diplomat until she wasn't able to anymore in the early 60s. So, I mean, just truly a long life of service. And again, a woman before her time. I mean, when you look at the fact that, you know, FDR was elected during the Great Depression and obviously was president through many, many huge historical upheavals in our country. And Eleanor was always outspoken and not afraid to say what she thought and not afraid to fight for the things that she thought would make the most impact on the most people. So really an incredible lady. So those are my contributions.
Thank you, Jody. And thank you to all of you for sharing these inspiring women in history titles. And next week, we are going to be sharing our favorite award winners and award-winning nominees. So join us for that next time, and we hope that you have great weeks. Bye.